Right, this is video 3, coming up with rapid concepts using the silhouette technique. Again, we are in Photoshop here. Start off with a silhouette. We've added another layer, again with a mask, and have some grayscales over the top as we start refining our character. Obviously, this is a very quick one, not much refinement on him at the moment, but we shall continue. And this part here was just adding in highlights and shadows, again keeping in mind direction of our light source and how it's going to affect our character. The next part that I sort of really want to focus in on, as I madly scribble away, is adding a little bit of color. Now color is super complicated, surprisingly, and it really gets a lot of people into trouble. And this is one of the reasons why, concept-wise, we typically start off using grayscales. Because grayscales are going to allow us to quickly and visibly look at our image and define, is it going to work using just light and dark. As soon as we start playing with color, we're going to end up with issues where what you might perceive as being a light value or a light color, sort of a light gray in real time, and you've got a color attached to it, say a red or something. In general perspective of it, it may actually be darker or lighter, and then if you were to kick out the color of an image which is you've based a lot of your importance on color, you'll start realizing that it doesn't actually have the correct value and depth that maybe you really wanted when you first sort of started with your character or your object or whatever. So sort of one of the reasons why we do start off with these grayscales and values. But anyway, let's say for now that I've got this guy fairly well established. It's way too quick for my normal technique, but anyway, let's add some color. So I'm going to create a new layer. Fantastic. And I'm going to once again control select and get my mask, and I'm going to add a new mask to this empty layer. I can rename this one color if I want, and I'm going to start adding some color. Now Photoshop's got a few different ways of getting color. We've got window, we can go to color, and it's going to bring up a color palette. We can cycle through. There are a few different variations on this. We got RGB sliders, for example, isn't too bad. Hue cube's quite good. Go specifically to a color and then start affecting the hues and stuff like that. We also got window, and we can go down to swatches. And these are just a big collection of colors, great for graphic design and stuff like that. And we can quickly go and grab colors for that. One of the techniques I like to sort of apply if we are adding colors, just to get your colors correct, especially if you're going for photorealistic or close to, is actually grab images off photographs off the internet or something like that. So we might go something like, what colors are we going to give this guy? Let's give them some desert. See what colors we can come up as far as desert colors go. So I'm actually just going to type in desert. You never know what you might find sometimes. Trying to go for some sort of earthy colors here. I'm kind of liking this. A little bit of blue in there. Let's have a quick look. And again, I'm not after this for the image, I'm actually after this for the color, so I'm going to throw that in there. It's fairly limited, but sometimes that works. We have got sort of complementary colors here in the sort of oranges and blues, and you can see that's just off on the side as another layer. So I'm going to select on this layer here, and I'm going to turn off these colors. This one can stay. I've called it color, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use nice soft brush again, So the same one I can use for the previous one, and I'm going to use my color picker again. I can click on the actual box here and start adding some colors here. Now, as I run my color picker over the image, you can see it's being affected over here on the color picker as well. So that's one way of doing it. If I got my brush selected, I can just hold down Alt, and that's going to do the same thing, bring up the color picker. And I'm going to select on this layer, and I'm going to start brushing and coloring him in. Now, if I just keep coloring in, it's just going to turn into a big orange version of himself, which, you know, kind of defeats the purpose of adding those values. So this is where our blend modes are going to come in handy. And here's our blend modes up here. There's a whole heap to choose from. They're all going to have varying effects. And sometimes you can cycle through them and get some pretty cool stuff. You know, do play around with the opacity. It can affect. And actually adding color can be fairly foxing for a lot of people as well. So for this, I'm going to show you a particular technique. And it essentially uses 3 lots at least of color. So we're going to have a base color. So I'm just going to go to the blend mode called color, which is a nice start. As you can see there, it just adds the color over the top. It doesn't really affect the values, the light to dark, so that's quite good there. I'm going to add, click on here and use my color picker, and I'm just going to drop in a little bit of variation. And because it's a nice light brush, you can see I can gradually paint in to that, and now we can just add a little bit of variance to that. Might even try a nice little bit of sharp red on the end there. It's just on the edges of his armor and stuff, just to get some sort of heat happening. Let's see what we can dig up through here. So, you know, this is just a nice quick way of doing a super rapid wash over our character, and it's not going to affect our values. So our light to dark, it's just going to sort of throw that in there, and, you know, have a play around with that. A little bit too harsh, so let's bring that up to a bit more of an orange, something like that. So you can start seeing that light sort of really affecting up the top here. Cool. I'm actually going to get rid of that image layer for now. You kind of get the point. So this is our color layer. That's great. I'm going to create a new layer. Same technique, mask. Let's select on that. Let's add it. Oops, sorry, I'm going to select on my layer and select that. And whoop, pen's acting up. Mask, great. And for this one here, we're going to affect the shadows. So, you know, even though we have this character and we already have some values, when it comes to coloring shadows, we need to look at slightly different blend modes. Now, interestingly enough, shadows seem to give off the effect that they're actually a different color to the surrounding objects. So if you have an area which is very reddy orange, typically your shadows are going to come out looking sort of a little bit more bluish. So I'm going to tick on here again, and I'm going to select, this guy's kind of reddish orangey here, so I'm going to actually select a sort of a dark blue for this, and I'm going to start drawing this in. Now, I'm doing this on purpose at the moment. It's not really acting as a shadow because I don't have a blend mode on this. It's just sort of, you know, painting blue over the top with a big paintbrush. And then I'm going to change this to one of these ones up here. So these are our typical darken areas. So multiply works quite well. And you can see it really sort of fits in there as a shadow. Adds a little bit of a blue tinge as we sort of head out from there. So, you know, have a play around with some of the colors that you can get for your shadows there. If it's too saturated, drop that down, and, you know, we can get some nice stuff happening. And just going to help us if we do need to go in and just defining our character a little bit, we can do that, get a little bit more detail in, specifically with sort of the shadow areas, more than anything else. So that kind of works. A couple of little quick tricks with this as well, and this, I'm going to go back to the shadow, the color option. So sorry, here. So this is our basic color over the top. I'm going to go to Image and Adjust, and to let's go to Hue and Saturation for the start, and this is going to allow me to cycle through my hue and saturation. Now, sometimes you can get something a little bit more interesting than what you thought. This could be, like an ice thing at the moment, or you can, if it's overly saturated, you can drop that down, getting a little bit more subtle, and it's not too bad. The other one is Image Adjust, Color Balance, and this is going to affect, so you can have affecting the shadows, midtones, etc. And it's just a nice way of just sort of doing a couple of quick variances of it. Anyway, back to this. Great for affecting shadow areas. It does apply a slight coloration to it, so it's kind of cool. Typically, you don't really get purely black shadows in characters and objects and stuff like that. Usually, they're affected by their surroundings, but there's a whole stuff on that. Anyway, I'm going to zoom into the next one, which is new layer. Again, Control Select on our mask. We got the marching ants, new mask, and this is going to do our highlights. I'm just going to rename the other one shadows, and this one here highlights. And this is going to do the opposite. This is going to allow us to pick up brightened areas and really make them pop and add a bit of color. And let's actually just go with sort of this aqua color here. And I'm going to just show you an example of how this works. I'm going to just draw sort of a blue line around this guy, sort of where we'd get a main big burst of light happening. And that doesn't quite look all that right, because once again, I've just painted that. Now I'm going to go to a blend mode, and to be, we're going to look around this area here. So I'm going to hit lighten, and we can see how that starts affecting areas. Light areas, it's going to sort of belt up some saturation. Darker areas, it's going to bring out the green again. And we can cycle through some of these other ones and just see how they're going to affect our character. And some are going to work better than others. It all depends on the values underneath and the colors underneath as well. Shortcut for cycling through, if we select on our move tool and hit shift and plus or minus, and as you can see, I'm doing that right now, and it's cycling through my blend modes. And if I spot one I like, I can go, divide, strangely enough, works. I can try and memorize that color burn. It's kind of interesting, but screen color dodge, overlay. Overlay is quite an exciting one. It's usually just sort of subtle enough that it adds something. And do play around with the opacity. So, turn that on and off. And once you get something that starts working, play around with the colors and play around with adding some highlight areas to your stuff. Now, again, this is done really rapidly. Usually would spend a lot more time getting the subtleties with this down a little bit more, but it's just a demo. So that kind of works. And with these, if you need a second lot of shadows, if you've done those shadows and maybe you've knocked down the opacity a bit, you can always create a new layer very easily, and apply a mask and do another round of shadows as required. Just add the blend mode, do something like color burn, and see how that affects accordingly. So, we've always got that option there. Once again, as with all of these, you may want to have a look at image, adjust, try color balance or hue and saturation, whatever others, and just sort of see if you can find something that's going to work best for you. And you know what, it's not working. The cool thing is we haven't destroyed our entire image. All we've done is we've added these colors on. We've still got our silhouette, we've still got our values, got our base color, got our shadows, and we've got our highlights. And again, we can make these a little bit more subtle as required. So, super quick for all that. And, add more. Sort of the final, I shouldn't say the final one, but one of the final techniques that we want to start looking at that I will typically use is creating a new layer and actually manually painting in using my existing stuff. So I'm not actually using a blend mode for this. I'm lightly painting in and using that eyedropper to localize my colors and just really just sort of finishing off any details. So by the time we get to this point, we've defined most of our color palette. You sort of don't want to really stray too much from that once you've got it, and we can go through and start just coloring in just with a nice soft brush, and just really refining our character. You can even do one specifically for doing highlights, and stuff like that as well. So use your layers is basically what I'm sort of alluding to, and you can very quickly build up and come up with some pretty cool looking stuff. All right, I'm going to stop it there. I do have a couple of more quick pointers in the next video to show you that really going to help you define your characters or your environments or vehicles or whatever it is, in a really, really powerful way.